Hey, are you overwhelmed with your family history research? I know that, the emails coming in from the different platforms saying, hey, we found more hints for you, or we found more, whatever records coming in. It's just kind of crazy, and you're doing research and you're chasing hints all over the place. Well, we're going to talk about that today, and I say we because I have a guest on the show. I like to call this type of episode a footnotes episode, and well, it's in the footnotes where the real sources are, and today's real source is Amy Johnson Crow. She is a professional genealogist and educator and has her own YouTube channel. So we're going to talk to her about how not to get overwhelmed with our genealogy research. But first, before we get there, if this is your first time here, my name is Connie Knox. I am a lifelong genealogist here to help you go further faster and factually with your family history research. There is a website, a newsletter, and Facebook page. Links for all of that stuff are in the show notes below. But we want to get to the subject matter, so let's jump over to the interview and listen to Amy and see what she has to say. Amy, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to see what you have to say. Well, first of all, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here on your channel. I've really been looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, we had been batting emails back and forth for the audience that at home as we were kind of talking about what we wanted to do here. And, I do get a lot of comments, and I'm sure you do too on your YouTube channel, about being overwhelmed and just like, oh my gosh, which direction do I go? So you suggested that we talk about some of those tips about how to not get overwhelmed with your family history. So take it away. Tell us what you think.
Well, I think the first thing with not getting overwhelmed, because let's face it, you make one discovery, you find one ancestor, and then you immediately want to find two more. You want to find that father and that mother, and it just keeps getting exponentially larger. So what I suggest is don't try to research all of your ancestors at the same time. Especially if you have very different sets of ancestors. Let's say that your father's side is from New England and your mother's side is from the deep South. Those are two very different sets of research skills. Obviously, a lot of different records you're going to be using in each one of those, and trying to research everyone at the same time, it's just going to become this massive jumble in your head. So your ancestors aren't going anywhere.
That's so true.
They are where they are. So just go ahead and pick one line right now to focus on. And it's not saying that that's the only line you're ever going to research. And what you'll find that will happen probably is that you'll make some progress with that line, and then you'll get stuck. Or, it's just not that exciting anymore. But you know what? Hey, now you have all these other lines that you can choose from and focus on them. It's going to help you stay a little bit more clear-headed with your research. It's also going to help you do better research because you can better focus on what you need to do in that location at that time. And so that's really my first tip, is don't research everyone at once.
I think some people feel like, I was just thinking of this analogy in my head. I think some people feel like they need to rake the leaves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
On the family tree, they need to clean up all the leaves on all of the branches.
Mm-hmm.
They need to rake them up, make sure they're all gone. Right. And quite frankly, I have leaves all over my tree because I'm usually focused on one branch, and I get really hyper focused. I'm like, this is my research question. This is what I'm going after. I put the blinders on. I'm not paying attention to any of the other leaves in my yard,
And you said something really important there, Connie, is that, having a good research question, rather than just sitting down and saying, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to do some research, putting that in air quotes. I'm going to do some research tonight. What is it that you want to find? There's a big difference between trying to identify where and when someone died, as opposed to trying to verify Civil War research or, Civil War service. So if you can get a good research question, that's really going to help you focus. And that's also going to help you avoid a lot of that overwhelm that we feel.
Well, let's talk about that. What elements do you feel need to go into a good research question?
Number one, it has to have a question mark. I know that sounds very flippant, and I don't mean for it to sound that way.
That's hilarious.
But think about it. How often do you go on Facebook? There are a lot of genealogy Facebook groups out there. I have one. And somebody will post, they'll say, I have a question. And then they will write 4 paragraphs about everything that they have ever thought about this ancestor and all of his wives and all of his children and this and that and the other thing. And then they end their Facebook post with, can you help me? It's like,
Yes.
Nowhere in those 4 paragraphs was there ever a question mark. So what is it that you want to find?
Correct.
So
true.
Pretend you're on Jeopardy. Phrase it in the form of a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But beyond that, it is something very specific. And I do think that we can have long-term questions and short-term questions. Who are all of the descendants of John and Mary? Okay, that's pretty broad. But to sit down and it's like, okay, what is Mary's maiden name? That is really hyper-focused. It's very specific. It's something that you can really build a research plan around, rather than just saying, I'm going to find everything about Mary.
I think a research question sometimes is almost like a ladder. One research question, like you suggested, who was her maiden, what was her maiden name? And then that's going to spawn more research questions up the ladder, right? But then we need to get focused on which research question do we want to pick that's really going to, kind of hit our end game. What is our end game, right? What is the goal? So if we're, the maiden name might be just one step in the process, right? And then our end game might be, I really want to find out what country they came from, when they jumped over the pond. But we got to take all these little baby steps, these little research questions up the ladder to get there. So very cool.
And thinking of it being iterative like that, okay, if we want to jump the pond, that's a pretty big leap. And I think that this is also where people start to feel overwhelmed, is that they try to take their research too far, too fast. They find their ancestors in the 1900 US Census, and it says that they were born in Italy. Okay, then immediately they start looking for records. They jump on FamilySearch and they start looking at Italian records, not having any idea where in Italy they came from, not having any idea of maybe who their siblings are, so that you can place them in a family unit back in Italy, and making that huge leap from 1900 census in, Chicago, and trying to immediately start looking at Italian records. You're looking for a needle in a haystack.
Right.
It's also, like you said, it's being iterative. It's okay. Yeah, we found them in the 1900 census in Chicago, and it says they were born in Italy, but what do we know about them in Chicago? What church did they attend? What occupation did they have? Who were their children? And if you know their children, if you know what church they attended, have you found church records that maybe point to godparents? Fun fact, you typically don't ask complete strangers to be godparents of your children.
Good point.
Yeah. So looking at those sort of associated people and getting a better idea of that ancestor in 1900 Chicago.
Yes.
And researching the heck out of them right there.
And you might just find that little town in Italy.
Exactly. You don't know what researching them in Chicago is going to reveal to give you that place of origin within Italy so that you're not researching an entire country.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
One of the things that I get a lot of questions about, and so I'd be interested to see your answer to this, is how far sideways do you go? Right? So you've got, your direct ancestors, but then they start going, well, I found brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and nephews and nieces, and how far do I go? So
I go as wide as I need to. And by that, I mean, at a minimum, I want to account for the siblings. Okay, because think of it this way: if you're researching just your ancestor, right?
Right.
You're finding that person's birth record, marriage record, death record, and you're researching that one person, hoping to find clues about the parents. Well, if that ancestor of yours was one of 8 children, you have 7 other people just on that part of the family that researching them might also give you clues about the parents.
So
So
true.
at a bare minimum, looking at the siblings. If I need to go wider, if I need to start looking at maybe the siblings' in-laws, who were they marrying? What can I see about them? And if I need to start researching, if I've also found aunts and uncles, it's still that it's just increasing the odds of finding something by looking at that person and those immediate siblings at a bare minimum.
And for those at home who might not realize what Amy's talking about is cluster research, fan club research, the friends, associates, and neighbors, the people that touch the lives of our ancestors, any of them and any of their records could have clues to help us find that one little tidbit. It could be that it was that uncle or that niece that has the family Bible.
Right.
Right.
And exactly.
And that family Bible was uploaded somewhere. But if you didn't research that niece, then you might not have discovered the pages of the family Bible that really maybe is the key that unlock the mysteries of the family. So, yeah.
Well, and it's like we were talking about a moment ago with looking at baptism records and how, those godparents or those sponsors in the baptism, they might just be friends, but they could also be related. So who are those people? And especially if one of them has the same surname as one of the parents or the maiden name of the mother, who is that person? Like I said, you're not just going to grab somebody off the street. That's a pretty close, I almost hesitate to use the word relationship because I don't mean to make it sound like it's always someone related. But if they're not related, chances are they're very close friends, but that still puts that person in context with a larger group of people.
Well, and even if they're not related, we don't want to ignore them because I have found newspaper articles, diaries, things that mention the neighbor or mention someone not related. I have found newspaper articles where 2 guys were my ancestor and a friend were pallbearers in a funeral. And if I hadn't found that newspaper article and recognized his name from other records, and I kept going, where'd this guy come out? He was a friend. He was not, I'm like, who is this guy that keeps popping up in my records? And then I started researching him and oh my gosh, it answered all the questions. So friends, associates, and neighbors. Thank you, Elizabeth Schoen Mills, for that one.
Yeah, get that fan club.
Yes, or cluster research. So you got any hot secrets or hot tips on, those brick walls that people just like, I can't get past this point.
Can't get past this point. Yeah, brick walls. Sometimes I think that we are our own worst enemies when it comes to research because we have put the blinders on and we don't look at those other people who are associated. And we also, and I say we because I do this too. Connie, you probably don't, but I do
No.
this, that, we all have our favorite resources. We all have our favorite types of records. I'm a happy girl looking at land records. I love land records. Okay. But we need to take the blinders off. And have we covered the bases with that ancestry? Do we have at least what we should have? Have we found him or her in all of the censuses that we would expect to find them in? Have we accounted for all of their marriages? Yes, our ancestors did sometimes get married more than once. Have we looked at not just their death record, but have we looked at associated records? Have we looked for them in the cemetery? Have we looked for cemetery records? Have we looked for religious records? Have we looked for obituaries in multiple newspapers? So it isn't just that, okay, well, I found his death certificate and it didn't tell me what I was hoping for. What else can we think about related to any of the events in that ancestor's life, and not thinking about just that birth record, just that marriage record, just that death record? What else is associated? And then beyond that, thinking about, okay, when was the last time I looked at someplace other than Ancestry or FamilySearch?
Bingo.
Have I looked at something like Digital Public Library of America? Have I looked at DPLA? Have I looked at, have I Googled? Have I done something as basic as a Google search? Have I looked at WorldCat? Have I looked at the website of that local genealogy society, even if I'm not a member? Have I looked at the public library website where that ancestor lived and see what they have? Really thinking beyond, okay, this is where I always research. What's the saying? If you keep doing what you always have done, you're always going to get what you always got.
Yes.
And we really do need to be a little bit more proactive in trying something different, whether that's, okay, I have always done this type of search on Ancestry, and that's just the way that I search. Well, have you tried something different? Have you tried doing a search just in one collection? Have you tried doing a wildcard search to pick up some variant spellings?
Good
Just
point.
try something different.
One of the things that I was thinking about too, when you had talked about census records and not finding somebody not finding the census in an area where you expect them to be found,
Mhm.
for those who may not be aware of that, that's called negative evidence. And so sometimes when we have negative evidence, it might be that they weren't there. So we need to look somewhere else, either neighboring counties or somebody else's household or some other way. So,
Right.
You kind of hit that point without, defining it, but I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that, because negative evidence is evidence.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But I also would caution people to not just do one search and say, oh, I didn't find him in Perry County, Ohio in 1880, therefore he wasn't living there. Well, you did that one search, but have you tried other spellings? Have you tried wildcards? Have you searched for somebody else in the household?
True.
And maybe that it's just his name was so horribly misindexed.
Yes.
Let's be real.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes they don't end up in. And if you have an instance where your ancestor just seems to always be in the same rural township all the time, there's nothing saying you can't go through that township page by page, just reading the census. You don't have to actually search. You can go and just go page by page. I wouldn't recommend doing that if they were living in Manhattan. but if they're in Hopewell Township, Perry County, Ohio, yeah, you can read that pretty easily.
One of the cool things that you can do, if you're not finding somebody where you expect them to find them is to think about what historical events are going on in the area. Maybe they shipped off to the Civil War or,
Yep.
some other event has happened and they're not home for that reason.
Right.
Or they migrated back to the homeland and then to bring more family back. Who knows? But very cool. Any other tips for us?
I think that when it comes to not feeling overwhelmed, I think we also need to get over feeling like we need to be perfect with everything. And by that, I mean, we think that if we're going to write something about our family history, that we have to write the 750-page definitive tome about the history of that whole family, right? And we don't need to do that. Okay, we can break it down into much smaller pieces. Rather than saying, well, if I'm going to write the family history, I have to write a book, why not blog?
Good point.
And if you're blogging, you don't even have to write like the entire biography of that one ancestor. You have a Civil War ancestor. Okay, just have a blog post about his Civil War service. Have a blog post where you're going through his Civil War pension file and all of the really cool things that you found in there.
So great.
Have a blog post about this really cool tombstone that you found. It's doing something. And I think that if we can get over that sense of everything has to be perfect, everything has to be quote unquote complete. I mean, I've been doing genealogy since the early 1990s. And I'm here to tell you there's no such thing as a complete genealogy.
So true.
Because, like I said earlier, as soon as you find one person, you immediately want to find two more.
And more records are coming online all the time.
More records are coming online. We have more access to more records right now than we have ever had.
Isn't it cool?
It is so cool.
Yeah.
And I think if we just go ahead and embrace that and say, okay, at this point in time, this is what I know about this ancestor and his family, go with that and be okay with maybe revising it later as more records come online, as you make more connections through DNA. You've made more connections because of that blog post that you did before, and it was some cousin bait and other people reached out to you. Just go ahead and embrace that as part of the process. Think of it as an opportunity rather than an impediment.
And more than anything else, just have fun with it. I mean, that's what this is all about, right?
Exactly.
Enjoy the journey.
Yep.
Well, I thank you so much for coming today and spending some time with us and getting to know us. Tell us, if people want to find you, how do they find you?
Well, they can find me over at my website, which is amyjohnsoncrow.com. They can also find my YouTube channel, which is Genealogy with Amy Johnson Crow.
Fabulous. I will leave links in the description box on both of those locations for those at home might want to follow you on YouTube and on your website. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you, Amy, for the interview. I appreciate it. It's always fun to talk to you and, kind of bat around ideas, how we can do our family history research a little bit more efficiently. For those of you who are watching at home, Amy has a very popular blog and a YouTube channel. I will leave links for that information in the show notes below. And well, right now there are more videos on the screen for your binge watching pleasure. So we'll catch you in the next one.